50,000 Persian soldiers against 25,000 Romans, a 2-to-1 disadvantage. An inexperienced commander facing the greatest military power in the East. The year is 530 Anno Domini.
The Roman Empire, what remains of it, is a shadow of its former glory. The western half collapsed decades ago. The eastern half, which we call Byzantine, is bleeding from every wound. The treasury is empty, the armies are undermanned, and the Persians smell blood. This is supposed to be the killing blow. The moment when the Sasanian Empire finally crushes Rome's last pretensions to power. The Persian king has sent his finest army to the fortress city of Dara on the frontier of Mesopotamia. His orders are simple: destroy the Roman army and take the city. But something extraordinary is about to happen. Something that will defy every logical calculation of this war. A young general named Belisarius, just 25 years old, never tested in a major pitched battle, is about to take 25,000 outnumbered, outmatched soldiers and crush the Persian invasion. He will do it with a simple trench, a hidden cavalry reserve, and a trap so perfect that the Persians will walk into it with their eyes open. This is the Battle of Dara, the day a forgotten genius announced himself to the world. To understand what happened at Dara, you must first understand what Rome had become by 530 Anno Domini. The Rome of Augustus and Trajan was dead. The legions that had conquered the world were gone. The Western Empire had fallen to Germanic tribes half a century before. Constantinople still stood, still called itself Roman, but it was a different creature entirely. The Byzantine army was smaller, poorer, and constantly on the defensive. For decades, the Persians had been winning. They had taken territory, they had demanded tribute, they had forced the Romans into humiliating treaties that required annual payments just to keep the peace. The Sasanian Empire, the Persian realm, was at the height of its power. It stretched from the borders of India to the frontiers of Rome. Its kings called themselves Shahanshah, King of Kings, and they meant it. Their armies were feared across the known world. Their cavalry was legendary. Their arrogance was matched only by their capabilities. Emperor Justinian had just taken the throne, and he inherited a disaster. The frontier was collapsing. Persian raids penetrated deep into Roman territory. Cities burned. Populations fled. The generals sent to stop them kept failing. Justinian needed a miracle. Instead, he got Belisarius. We do not know exactly where Belisarius came from. The sources say he was born in Thrace, in the Balkans, probably to a minor military family with no particular distinction. He rose through the ranks with unusual speed. He caught the eye of Justinian when the future emperor was still just a powerful courtier in the palace. By his early 20s, Belisarius commanded the emperor's personal bodyguard, a position of tremendous trust. By 25, he was given command of the entire eastern frontier. This was not a reward, it was a test, possibly a death sentence. The Eastern Command was where careers went to die. The Persians were relentless. The Roman forces were inadequate. Previous commanders had either been defeated in battle, removed for failure, or simply given up. Justinian was sending his young protege into a meat grinder. But Belisarius had something the previous commanders lacked. He had studied. He had thought. He was not content to simply follow the traditional Roman playbook that had been failing for decades. He had looked at the Persian way of war, analyzed it, dissected it, understood its strengths and its weaknesses, and asked a question that military history rarely asks. What if we stop fighting them on their terms? This was not a question that came naturally to Roman generals. Rome had built an empire by fighting Roman battles, using Roman tactics, and forcing enemies to adapt to them. The idea of adapting to an enemy was almost heretical. But Belisarius was not interested in tradition. He was interested in victory. The Persians were masters of mobile cavalry warfare. Their heavy cavalry, the clibanarii, were armored from head to toe in gleaming scale mail. Both horse and rider were encased in metal. They carried long lances, kontoi, the Greeks called them, and fought in dense formations that could shatter almost any infantry line on contact. When Persian heavy cavalry charged, they were like an avalanche of iron. Nothing could stand against them in an open field.
And that was only half their army. Their horse archers could harass enemies for hours, circling just out of reach, wearing down formations with endless flights of arrows.
They would dance around an enemy army, bleeding it slowly, until the heavy cavalry delivered the killing blow. The Persian army was fast, flexible, and utterly confident. They had been defeating Roman armies for generations.
They knew exactly how good they were. Every Roman commander had tried to match the Persians in mobility. Everyone had failed. You cannot out-cavalry the masters of cavalry. Belisarius decided to do the opposite. He would not try to match Persian speed. He would force the Persians to attack him. He would make them come to him, across ground that he had prepared.
He would use the one thing Rome still had in abundance: engineering. Romans had always been builders. Their roads, their aqueducts, their walls, these were the monuments of their civilization.
Belisarius would build something much simpler, but no less deadly. In early 530, word reached Belisarius that a massive Persian army was approaching. 50,000 soldiers under the command of Perozes, one of the Persian king's most experienced generals.
Their target was the fortress of Dara, a Roman stronghold that controlled the trade routes into Mesopotamia. Dara was a choke point. If it fell, the Persians would have a clear path into the Roman heartland.
If it held, the frontier remained intact. Belisarius had 25,000 men, half the Persian force. Many of his soldiers were recent recruits, poorly trained with no experience against the elite Persian cavalry.
Some had never seen combat at all. They were garrison troops, city guards, local levies pressed into service because there was no one else. Any conventional wisdom said to retreat.
Shelter behind Dara's walls. Wait for reinforcements that might never come. Let the Persians besiege the city and hope they gave up before the food ran out. Belisarius refused.
He marched his army out of Dara and positioned them on the plain in front of the city. He was going to fight, but he was going to fight on his terms.
This is where genius enters the story. In the days before the Persian arrival, Belisarius ordered his men to dig. They dug a trench across the center of the plain, directly in front of the Roman lines.
Not a massive fortification, not a ditch too deep to cross, just a trench, deep enough to break a cavalry charge, wide enough to force attackers to slow down. But this trench was not straight.
Belisarius had it dug in a broken pattern. Some sections angled forward, others angled back. This created a series of channels that would funnel attackers toward specific killing zones.
Any cavalry trying to cross would naturally flow into these channels, where they would be packed together, vulnerable and unable to maneuver. The trench also served another purpose. It was a visible line in the sand. It told the Romans, this is where we stand. This is where we hold. No retreat.
Behind the central trench, he placed his infantry, heavily armored spearmen and swordsmen, disciplined, well-drilled. Their job was to hold the line, to absorb the Persian assault, to make the Persians think they were winning.
And on the flanks, hidden behind the walls of Dara and behind low hills on either side of the battlefield, Belisarius positioned his cavalry. 600 Hunnic horse archers on one side, fierce nomad warriors who had been hired as mercenaries. His own heavy cavalry on the other, the Belisarius, his personal retinue of elite horsemen. They had one order: wait. Wait until the Persians committed fully to the center. Then strike. The trap was set. Now Belisarius needed the Persians to walk into it. Perozes arrived with his army and immediately understood that something was wrong. The Romans were not behind their walls. They were standing in the open, inviting battle. This was not normal Roman behavior. This was not how a smaller army should act. He saw the trench, he saw the Roman formations, he saw the dust rising from thousands of feet on a hot Mesopotamian plain.
But Perozes was confident. He had 50,000 men. He had the finest cavalry in the world. He had been fighting Romans his entire career. Whatever trick they were attempting, it would not matter. Numbers would tell. They always did.
On the first day, there was no battle. The two armies faced each other across the plain, taking measure. Perozes sent forward skirmishers to test the Roman lines. They exchanged arrows with Roman archers.
A few men fell on both sides.
Small cavalry skirmishes erupted and died down, but neither commander committed to a full engagement. Perozes was waiting for something. Reinforcements were on the way. 10,000 more Persian soldiers who would make his advantage even more overwhelming. He could afford to wait. Belisarius could not. Every day of delay gave the Persians more time to study his defenses, find weaknesses, and bring up more men. But he held his nerve. He did not attack. On the second day, the 10,000 reinforcements arrived. The Persian army now numbered 60,000 men against 25,000 Romans. The odds were no longer 2 to 1. They were closer to 3 to 1. Perozes gave the order to attack. The Persian plan was straightforward. Overwhelm the flanks. Collapse the center. The Persian cavalry would sweep around the Roman wings, surrounding them, crushing them against the anvil of their own infantry. It was a tactic that had worked 100 times before. It was the Persian way of war.
The first wave came at the Roman left flank. Persian cavalry thundered across the plain, lances leveled, a wall of armored horses and armored men. The ground shook with their approach. Dust rose in choking clouds. The air filled with the thunder of hooves, the jingle of harness, the war cries of confident killers.
The Romans on that flank braced themselves, but then something unexpected happened. The Persian cavalry reached the trench. They could not simply ride through it. Horses stumbled, riders pulled up. The momentum of the charge, the whole terrible physics of heavy cavalry, was broken in an instant. The Persians slowed, tried to cross in smaller groups, and lost their cohesion. The Roman infantry met them with a wall of shields and stabbing spears. The fighting was brutal. Men screamed. Horses fell, their legs shattered by the trench's edge. Blood mixed with the dust of the plain. Riders were thrown. Infantry swarmed them before they could rise. But the Romans held. They held because they were not trying to win on the flanks. They were trying to delay. On the opposite flank, the same scene repeated. Another Persian cavalry charge. Another collision with the trench. Another grinding melee where Roman discipline matched Persian ferocity. The Persians pushed forward. The Romans pushed back. Neither side broke. Perozes watched from the rear. He was frustrated. The flanks were not collapsing as planned. These Romans were stubborn. They fought harder than he expected. But he still had his reserve, a massive force of heavy cavalry that he had held back for the killing blow. The cream of the Persian army, the finest horsemen in the world. He ordered them forward, not at the flanks, but at the center. He would punch through the Roman line and end this. The Persian reserve thundered toward the Roman center. Thousands of armored cavalry, lances lowered, banners streaming. This was the moment of maximum danger. This was the moment when everything could fall apart. But Belisarius had been waiting for this. The entire battle had been designed to create this moment. The Persian cavalry charged into the center. They hit the trench. They slowed down. They pushed forward anyway, crossing in ragged groups, their formations already broken by the obstacle. The Roman infantry bent, but did not break. The fighting became a chaotic swirl of men and horses. The Persians were among the Romans now, lance to spear, sword to sword. And then the Hunnic horse archers struck. 600 Huns, who had been hiding behind the walls of Dara, suddenly emerged at a full gallop. They swept around the Persian right flank like a storm cloud made flesh. They did not charge into the Persians. They did not need to. They simply circled, firing arrow after arrow into the packed mass of Persian cavalry. The Persians could not turn to face them. They were stuck in the trench, stuck in the melee, unable to maneuver. At the same moment, Belisarius personally led his heavy cavalry into the Persian left flank. The effect was devastating. The Persians in the center suddenly found themselves attacked from 3 sides. Enemies in front, enemies on the left, enemies on the right. There was nowhere to go. The retreat was blocked by their own reinforcements, still pressing forward. The advance was blocked by Roman infantry, who refused to die. It was not a battle anymore. It was a killing box. The Persian officers screamed orders. Turn, form line, retreat. But the orders were useless. There was no room to turn, no space to form, no direction to retreat. The arrows kept falling. The Roman cavalry kept pressing. The infantry kept stabbing. Panic spread through the Persian ranks like fire through dry wheat. Men who had been fighting bravely moments before began looking for escape routes that did not exist.
The formation collapsed. The discipline vanished. 60,000 of the finest soldiers in the world became 60,000 individuals desperately trying not to die. The slaughter lasted for hours. By the time the sun set over the plain of Dara, 8,000 Persian soldiers lay dead. The field was carpeted with bodies. Men and horses lay tangled together in grotesque heaps.
The trench that had seemed so insignificant that morning was now a mass grave. Countless more Persians were wounded, captured, or scattered across the landscape. The survivors fled in disorder.
The siege of Dara was broken before it began. Perozes himself barely escaped. His army, which had marched to Mesopotamia to deliver the death blow to Roman power, limped home in humiliation. They had lost nearly a quarter of their force to a commander they had never heard of. Belisarius was 25 years old. He had just won one of the most decisive victories in Roman history.
But here is what makes Dara more than just a battle. Here is what makes it a masterpiece. Belisarius won with almost no cavalry losses. His infantry held the line, but was never in serious danger of being overrun.
The Persians did almost all of the dying. They walked into a trap that was visible from the moment they arrived on the battlefield, and they walked into it anyway.
Why? Because Perozes could not believe it was a trap. He had 60,000 men. He had fought Romans before. He knew they were desperate, underfunded, and outmatched.
The idea that a 25-year-old unknown commander could outthink him or design a battlefield specifically to neutralize Persian advantages never occurred to him. That arrogance was his fatal flaw.
The same arrogance that has destroyed generals for as long as there have been generals. Belisarius understood something that Perozes did not. He understood that battles are not won by the bigger army. They are won by the army that fights on its own terms. The Persians were magnificent in mobile warfare, so Belisarius made them fight a static battle. The Persians were devastating in cavalry charges, so Belisarius broke their charges with a ditch. The Persians were skilled at envelopment, so Belisarius enveloped them instead. It was judo, using the enemy's strength against them. The consequences of Dara rippled outward for years. The Battle of Dara made Belisarius famous. Word spread across Constantinople. The young general who had done the impossible, who had crushed the Persian host with half their numbers, who had proved that Rome could still win. Justinian recalled him to Constantinople as a hero. The emperor had plans, grand, impossible plans, to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. He needed generals who could achieve the impossible. He had found one. Within a few years, Belisarius would be given command of an even more audacious mission, the reconquest of the Western Roman territories from the Germanic kingdoms that had taken them. He would invade North Africa with a tiny force and conquer the entire Vandal kingdom in a matter of months. He would invade Italy and take Rome itself. He would come closer to restoring the Roman Empire than anyone since its fall. His later career would be marked by both triumph and tragedy. Jealous courtiers would undermine him. Justinian himself would grow suspicious of his too successful general. Belisarius would be recalled, disgraced, restored, and recalled again. He would die old and forgotten, his achievements claimed by others, his genius recognized only by historians centuries later. But all of that came after. On that day at Dara, none of it mattered. What mattered was a ditch, a simple trench, dug in the right place with the right shape for the right purpose. One piece of engineering that neutralized 60,000 men. Modern military academies still study Dara. They analyze Belisarius' use of terrain, his coordination of infantry and cavalry, and his patience in waiting for the perfect moment to spring his trap. They call it a masterpiece of defensive warfare. But the lesson of Dara is simpler than any textbook makes it.
When you are outnumbered, do not fight your enemy's battle. Make them fight yours.
Perozes had every advantage that morning. Numbers, equipment, experience, momentum. He should have won. Every calculation said he would win. But he was fighting a man who did not care about calculations.
A man who looked at impossibility and asked, how do I make this work anyway? 25,000 against 60,000. A general who had never fought a major battle versus one who had won dozens.
Rome's dying empire against Persia's rising power. One ditch, two hidden cavalry forces, one perfect trap. 8,000 dead Persians.
Roman losses were so light that the sources barely bother counting them. 530 AD, the plain before Dara. The day a young genius proved that numbers are just numbers.
And the day the Persians learned that the Roman Empire was not quite dead yet.
There is a postscript to this story, a bitter one. The peace that followed Dara did not last. The Persians returned. They always returned. Belisarius would fight them again, win again, and be recalled again. The frontier would continue to bleed for centuries, long after both Belisarius and Justinian were dust.
But for one day, on one plain, a 25-year-old general with an impossible task looked at 60,000 enemies and asked, how do I win anyway? He found the answer in a ditch. Sometimes that is all it takes.